There you go. Good catch, man.
Otherwise,
catch.
we would
Now.
just be recording for no reason.
Oh, man.
All right, guys.
This
Take
would be
two.
the last interview we would ever get. 100%.
I know, right? Let's go. I'm Rosa Panta. This is the Clinic All NBA podcast. I have the three hooligans with me again. JJ, how you living, my friend?
Feeling good, feeling great. How are you?
I'm feeling great too. John, how you living?
Doing awesome. Excited for this episode.
And Sami, how you living, my friend?
I cannot complain, my man. How are you?
I'm doing good, and we have a special guest with us. This is gonna be a Memphis Grizzlies dedicated pod, and we have the broadcast play-by-play voice of the Memphis Grizzlies, Pete PRANICA. Pete, how are you living, my friend?
I am living my best life. How about that?
That sounds good. And Pete, we're gonna talk about the state of the Grizzlies, the grit and grind era, and a little bit about your journey into broadcasting. But first, I wanted to ask you kind of a random question, just to get you kind of loose.
Okay.
You know, the NBA has released their top 75 for this year. And, you know, Memphis actually was probably the least represented in this list. I think they only had, Sami, who was it, Allen Iverson?
3 games of AI.
3 games of AI.
And none at home. And boy, do I have a good Allen Iverson story for you. So whenever you want to get to an Allen Iverson story, I've got one for you.
Okay, that sounds
Awesome.
great to us.
Nice.
But our question is, what former or current Memphis Grizzly should have made the top 75 and why?
If there would have been one, I think it should have been Pau Gasol. Multiple championships, and in some sense, I think became the prototype for the stretch four. Not that he was a very prolific three-point shooter, but he kind of revolutionized or changed our perception of what the power forward position can be in the NBA. And obviously had won championships, has played well across the board. I think he is destined to be in Springfield because of the entirety of his career, including, of course, his play for the Spanish national team, in addition to what he did in the NBA. But yeah, if you had to pick one Grizzly that wore the uniform at one point, I think Pau Gasol would be the choice.
Oh man, that's
Pete,
a
I
great
gotta
choice. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Pete, you put a smile on my face as a Laker fan. That's one of my guys that I thought was a real slight on that list.
Well, you know, and Pau's a great person too, and I've always enjoyed my interactions with him throughout the years. No matter what uniform he's worn, he's always greeted me with a smile and a big hug. And the whole Gasol family, they're real quality people. Got to know Mrs. Gasol a little bit when Mark was in Memphis, and it's a great family, and those are 2 wonderful young men. And yeah, I would say Pau would have to be the one I'd put on the anniversary team if you had to pick a Grizzly, other than Allen Iverson, who was there for 3 games.
Right. I think another person that played for Memphis, sort of like in his twilight years, though, could have been Vince Carter.
True. Yeah, I forget about that. I think of Pau because primarily he ended up starting his career with the Grizzlies,
right?
And that's why I think of him. Yeah, I'm a little surprised Vince Carter didn't make the top 75. That to me seemed a bit odd. But 75 years, 75 players. It's a pretty steep mountain to climb to get into that list.
Yeah, I'm going to have to absolutely agree. And let's talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. They're currently 7-7, had recent losses to the Suns and inexplicably the New Orleans Pelicans, but they had a dominating win against the Houston Rockets, who are actually surprisingly kind of feisty despite their record. You guys won 136-102. You're now 14 games in. How do you feel about your Memphis Grizzlies?
I don't know how to feel about this team. It's funny because, well, the reason I say that is I had on my own podcast, the Grizz Weekly Grind, all right, which you can find on HoopsPodNet. I had Mark J. Spears, whom I've known for a long time, covered the Denver Nuggets and now writes for the Undefeated, and we've always had real good conversations. And he said the Grizzlies at this point are a team that can beat any team and lose to any team. And even Taylor Jenkins said to his guys, he said, okay, there are 2 versions of the Memphis Grizzlies. There's the version of the Memphis Grizzlies that went on the road, overcame a double-digit deficit and beat the Clippers on their own floor. There's the version of the Grizzlies that went into Golden State, overcame a big deficit, and won in overtime. And then there's the version of the Grizzlies that lost to the New Orleans Pelicans. Which version are we going to be? And that's really where we are right now. This is a team that by average age, they're the second youngest team in the league. And the big challenge for them is defense right now. Defense has to be connected. It has to be communicative. And the first day of practice of training camp, Taylor Jenkins is like, guys, we need to talk on defense. We need to be, communicating with one another. And it's a team right now that defensively isn't as disciplined as it needs to be. It's not as communicative as it needs to be on defense. And their offense is not good enough at this point to overcome those shortcomings. So if your defense is bad, and I think they've only had 2 games with a defensive rating of under 110 points per 100 possessions in an individual game. It's hard. It's hard to score enough to overcome that. So, if they lock in defensively and the game plan discipline is really good on the defensive side of the floor, they're really good. And if they're making a ton of shots, they're really good. But if one of those 2 things isn't present, then you end up losing to the New Orleans Pelicans.
Right. And, kind of thinking about your guys' season early on, I mean, Dillon Brooks goes down with a hand injury. How much of that kind of derailed sort of the defensive identity for Memphis?
I think that Dillon coming back won't solve all the issues, but the fact that he wasn't there from the jump, I think, was very hurtful, because teams don't like to play against Dillon. In Memphis, we call him Dillon the Villain. He likes playing he likes playing the heavy. I think some of the Portland fans will remember the games at the Rose Garden. No, I don't call it the Moda Center. It's the Rose Garden. I think some fans remember, how he came in there with a lot of swag, and the Grizzlies were missing that. And he is the guy who will always take the other team's best scorer, no matter who it is. And they were missing that from the jump. Now you're going to get some of that back, and it remains to be seen if their on-ball defense is going to improve. It just can't be Dillon Brooks doing it. It has to be all 5 guys on the floor.
So in terms of Ja Morant's MVP case, because we're really big fans of Ja Morant, and
huge fans.
All 4 of us actually picked him to be this year's MVP pick. Do you still think he has a strong case, and you think that the Grizzlies are capable of getting into the top 5 seed this season?
I based on what I've seen so far, I think a top 6 seed to avoid the play-in tournament is a pretty heavy lift for this team right now, unless their defense drastically improves. Now, if it improves, then now maybe you've got a shot there. As far as John, the MVP, you have to win, I think, at a much higher level than 500. Mm-hmm. That is going to be, I think, what would hold him back from that. If the Grizzlies don't have a good record at the time of the All-Star break, it could also work against him for an All-Star selection. So MVP case at this point, I don't think really exists in a meaningful way, unless this would be a team that would go on and win 55 games or something like that, and he maintains the current level of production. I mean, he and Luka are the only 2 players right now averaging 25, 5 boards, and 7 assists. So that's pretty rarefied company with those 2 guys.
So speaking of Ja specifically, as I said, we all kind of have like our player crush on him from a team that we're not homers for. Mm-hmm. Beyond the stats, because you mentioned them, the stats are amazing so far. As someone who watches every one of their games, obviously, what have you noticed as his biggest jump from last year to this year in terms of his on-court demeanor and the actual way he's playing beyond the stat sheet?
He's been more aggressive. There were times last year where he would just walk into a 3 early in the clock, and it's like, why are you doing this? He's leading the league as we talk right now. He's leading the league in paint points per game, okay, as a 6 foot something guard. And he's understood that he needs to be more aggressive offensively. I talked with his dad before the season started, and they watched a lot of tape and they had some conversations. And his dad kept telling him, you need to be more aggressive to score yourself. He said, your assist numbers are not going to suffer if you're a more dangerous scorer. In fact, your assist numbers are probably going to go up. And Ja has increased his scoring because he has been more willing to take that mid-range jump shot, to take that 12-foot shot just inside the foul line, that he's been able to seek out those crevices, and he does have the explosiveness and the hops to jump over taller players and to finish floaters in the lane rather than settle for long twos or threes. Now, having said that, he's shooting the three at a much better rate in terms of accuracy than he did early part of last year. But where his biggest step has been, I think it's understanding where he can be a more effective and efficient scorer.
Yeah, that makes totally complete sense. I actually want to ask you about Jaren Jackson Jr. So it seems like Ja Morant, obviously, he is the leader of this group. He is the number one option on offense. And maybe number two will be Dillon Brooks. And it seems like if this team has aspirations to go deep into the playoffs, they need to rely on Jaren Jackson Jr. to actually develop into a solid number three. Do you feel like he's headed that direction?
It's kind of the same thing as where are the Grizzlies right now? There's good Jaren, and then there's not so good Jaren.
Right.
There's Jaren who, in the game against New Orleans, shot a lot of threes, did not meet with a lot of success.
No.
Got a couple of foul calls, did not like the calls that went against him, and you could tell by his body language that he just wasn't into the game. I'm not making shots, I'm not getting calls, I don't like the calls against me, and he finished with 2 or 3 points in that game. Now the next night or next game, he comes back against Houston, and rather than shooting threes all the time, although he did take and make a couple of threes, he went into the post and put in some nice spin moves. And you're thinking okay, this is the Jaren. If there is a prototype, if you wanted to get some video and say, this is who I think Jaren Jackson should be, you show him tape of the Houston game where he gets low post position, gets an early seal, doesn't power dribble, he doesn't crab dribble. No, throw me the ball, I've got it, seal,
yes.
Turn to the basket. You do that on a consistent basis, and then the three-point shots are going to be even wider open. Where I get frustrated with Jaren is when his first opportunity is, I'm going to shoot a three. Because, and here's the other thing too, and Brevin Knight has pointed this out during the course of the telecast. Most teams play with one big. The Grizzlies have two. So that Steven Adams is going to draw the biggest guy on the other side to guard him. The guy that's guarding Jaren is going to be smaller in almost every case.
Right.
So run to the box, put your hand up, let Ja throw you the ball, go finish. Period. Amen. I mean, it really. you would think it would. You think it would be that simple, but we're also working with a player who is coming off a long layoff because of a knee injury, and we're also talking about a player who is Jaren, 21 years old. So he's still pretty young in his basketball life. And so sometimes there is maybe a lack of discipline in his offensive game and understanding game situations. And look, I got a guy who's 6'7" on me. Hey, yeah, I'm going to take this guy into the post. That's a more efficient option than shooting a three.
Yeah, it sounds like he should be talking to Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol, getting down in the block there and maybe kicking out. The problem, I think, or part of the problem, I think, with the Memphis Grizzlies is that it seems like there's a lot of players that sort of occupy the same space on offense. Like with Jaren Jackson Jr., you just mentioned that he does well on the post, and it seems like he kind of drifts out to the three-point line because Ja Morant wants to operate in the same space. Do you sort of see the same thing?
There's a little bit of that, but I mean that's today's NBA. Everybody wants to shoot threes. Nobody goes into the post anymore. The days of the back to the basket big are pretty much over and done with. But I mean, you raise an intriguing point that sometimes they're trying to occupy the same space. I think that there's a way to do this properly, and to get Jaren to be an inside-out player. He can be a stretch four, but being a stretch four isn't just shooting threes. It's doing other things. And his rebounding numbers have come up. His block numbers are very, very good. So defensively, he's been good. He still struggles sometimes with fouls because, again, there's a lack of discipline sometimes in how he defends, in trying to get a block shot. A lot of reaching, a lot of grabbing, not moving his feet. So these are all little things that once he cleans up, I mean, he can be an all-star caliber player. But right now, I think he's coming back after a long layoff, and again, it's kind of fits and starts, and some nights are better than others.
For the Grizzly fans out there that remain really hopeful in this team, what would you say to these fans? What could they look forward to for the upcoming season?
Well, I would say that this is a young team that has the potential to be very cohesive. It's a good group of guys. They really, really enjoy playing for Taylor Jenkins. They enjoy playing together, and that cohesion, and that's why the defensive lapses early are so perplexing, because this is a team that's pretty together. They just need to communicate more on the floor rather than just assume, that everything is going to work out fine. But you're seeing Ja take a huge leap forward. Desmond Bane has taken a leap forward.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Jaren Jackson Jr. has the potential to take a great leap forward. And it's a team that is largely a holdover team from last year, with the notable exception, obviously, of Valanciunas going to New Orleans and being replaced with Steven Adams.
I actually wanted to ask you about that. If we did a little bit of revisionist history here with that trade, do you still think... what did you think of the trade in the first place? I guess we should start there.
Well, I think from a basketball perspective, it's a nod to today's NBA, which, as I said, the back to the basket big is kind of a dinosaur. And you're talking about Ja and Jaren operating in the same space. Well, Jonas would operate in that same space. So,
right.
And Jonas, you didn't have to run plays for him. You could run plays for him. But he's a more he takes up more shots than Steven Adams does. Steven Adams is basically rebounder. We're finding out he's a very good passer and screen setter. So, having said that, I think it was, you had contract issues, okay, because JB had a pretty big number. You were also looking at the fact that, okay, can we space the floor better if he's not there, if we have Steven Adams instead? So I think it was a combination of things. Personally, hated to see Jonas go. Jonas is a funny guy. He's a great guy to be around. We enjoyed having him. He was just so warmly embraced by everybody in Memphis. He was kind of the big lovable lug who, would rack up 16 double-doubles in a row, make a couple of threes, had a rather interesting fashion sense. He had this denim jacket with a portrait of a wolf airbrushed on the back of it. He's just a fun guy to have around. Having said that, Steven Adams is also a pretty fun guy to be around. But Steven obviously just does not have the offensive game that Jonas does, and that's the biggest change. But I don't think that the Grizzlies were looking to have another five that was going to be as offensively productive as Jonas was, because they were more interested in what Jaren and Ja could do.
Do you feel like JV was the vocal leader last year? And do you think they lost a vocal leader? It just seems like for defense, I feel like there always needs to be some sort of floor general. And
that's a really good point, yeah.
I think Memphis doesn't have that. And I don't know if the absence of JV, maybe I'm just pulling at straws here, because it seems like they were better defensively last year than they are this year. And I'm just trying to find out why. You know
what, Ro? It's interesting you bring it up. I looked at it today. The defensive numbers are only slightly worse this year than they were last year. It's the offensive numbers that are struggling. If you're looking at efficiency, if you're looking strictly at offensive efficiency, the offensive efficiency has dropped more than the defensive efficiency has dropped. I think Jonas, he was a good communicator in getting that defense organized. My thought, and I've said this on my podcast, that you look at Phoenix, and sure, they got Chris Paul, who's a future Hall of Famer. They also got Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder is one of those old guys who's been around. And
That's true.
When your nickname is the boss man, okay, guys are going to listen to you. And we saw firsthand when Crowder was in Memphis, along with Solomon Hill. And both of these guys are role players, but there was an element of gravitas about them that the younger players really responded. The Grizzlies don't have that anymore. They don't have anybody that has that deep level of experience. And before that, going back to your, dropping Vince Carter's name, you had Vince Carter. This is a team that I'm trying to think, is there anybody over 30? I
don't think so.
And so it's the second youngest team, as I said, by average age. And, Steven Adams has been vocal in working with the other bigs, but defensively, who gets them organized, I don't know. And that to me is the biggest thing. There isn't that one guy. I remember when I arrived in Memphis, it was Shane Battier. Battier had got everybody organized defensively. Marc Gasol later got everybody organized defensively. I don't think that this team has that defensive bellwether to get them organized and to make sure that everybody's in the right place at all times. And I think that's the reason why this team is 7-7. On the other hand, to this point, the Grizzlies have played the toughest schedule to date. So 7-7 with the league's toughest schedule, that's not too bad.
The NHL season is underway, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, has an unbelievable offer to celebrate the greatest sport on ice. New customers can bet just $1 on any NHL game and win $100 in free bets if either team scores a goal. Doesn't matter if it's a one-time clapper or a depth deflection, however they light the lamp, you win. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code TBPN. Throw down $1 on any NHL game and win $100 in free bets if either team scores a goal. This week, one puck in the net nets you a big win with promo code TBPN at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only, new customers only, minimum $5 deposit and $1 wager required, one per customer, restrictions apply, see DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
And going on the subject of defense specifically, you mentioned Marc Gasol. We actually also wanted to chat a bit about the grit and grind era and your thoughts there. Now, for me, I'm the Clippers homer of the bunch here. So I remember the wars that the Grizzlies and Clippers had in the playoffs. And the main thing I remember about those games is that they were always just these slugfests, and that if I was a neutral fan, I would enjoy going to those games. But as a Clippers fan, part of me just hated watching because I knew the team was going to get beat up and the whole game was just going to be a slugfest. So on the subject of that era, I wanted to ask, what's your favorite memory of the grit and grind era? And if you had to define a specific team, because I know they had battles with the Thunder, the Spurs, the Clippers, who would you define as their greatest rival?
I think it'd be the Clippers, just from the element of sheer hatred between the two teams. I mean, there was tremendous bad blood. There was bad blood with Oklahoma City too. The Spurs, it was total respect, because the Grizzlies were trying to be Spurs 2.0. I mean, they made no bones about it. They really liked the San Antonio organization, and they tried to do a lot of the same things that San Antonio did. I remember when Clippers go up 2-0 on the Grizzlies in the playoffs. And the first game out in LA, Clippers absolutely kicked Memphis's butt. Second game, it takes a Chris Paul shot late. And then after that, the Grizzlies just said, no, we're winning 4 straight. And, the deciding game, I think Joey Crawford was working it. Guys got thrown out. Matt Barnes kicked the garbage can. The Clippers were so frustrated and so angry, and they storm off the court. And there is for those of you who know the movie Hustle and Flow, Craig Brewer, the Memphis filmmaker, there was in that motion picture the song "Whoop That Trick." Well, the Grizzlies game presentation staff changed that to "Whoop That Clip."
I did not know that.
Neither did I.
And so this was the rallying cry. And so when things were going well for the Grizzlies and you were in the fourth quarter, the whole building of 18,000 was chanting, "Whoop that clip, whoop that clip." And, the battles between Zach Randolph and Blake Griffin were amazing.
Yeah.
There were chokeholds, there were body slams, there were, guys being pulled down, and the local media would always joke of like, well, there's the Zach Randolph, Blake Griffin commemorative double technical foul, because we knew there would be offsetting technicals at some point during those games. So that was that. There was the utter hatred of Chris Paul. There was the Tony Allen, trying to defend, and he ends up kicking Chris Paul in the face in the regular season game. It was that was the biggest rivalry, period. The end, absolutely.
What was the vibe around the team? Obviously, this is a much younger group that you're around now. That team was obviously very experienced, went to the playoffs pretty deep a couple times. What was the vibe day by day for you being around them all the time?
It was really different because we talk about the core four. Okay, so Marc Gasol, Tony Allen, Zach Randolph, Mike Conley. You could not have imagined four more different personalities. And being around them, it was very, very different. Mark could be silly, like the time he dressed as a 7-foot cousin It for a Halloween party. That was a sight to see. But he was usually pretty serious. Tony Allen was way out there. Zach Randolph was just kind of happy-go-lucky until he got in between the lines, and then he was all business. And Mike Conley is one of the classiest, nicest, sweetest guys you'd ever want to meet. So, you knew that when they were on the floor, you always had a chance to win. They were really quality players, and they played hard. It was the period where the city of Memphis fell in love with the Memphis Grizzlies. And it started with that playoff victory over San Antonio when San Antonio was a 1 seed and the Grizzlies were an 8 seed. And that was where the whole grit and grind thing really started. For your listeners who aren't aware, it all started one night. Memphis had lost the previous night, I think, in San Antonio. Rudy Gay, I think, was out with a concussion. Somebody else was missing due to injury.
It was Tony Allen, right?
No, Tony Allen played. No, Tony was the star of the game. And the Grizzlies were getting boat raced in the first half, and Lionel Hollins went in the locker room at halftime and said, "You guys act like you don't think you can win. Get out there in the second half and show that you can win." And they just shut down Kevin Durant. Tony Allen just absolutely shut him down. And the game's over. Grizzlies win at Oklahoma City, which is really hard. In those days, it was really, really hard to do. And our sideline reporter, grabs Tony Allen and he says, "Tony, great game." And he says, "It's all hard. It's all grit, grind." And wow, marketing slogan is born.
That's what I meant by Tony Allen, by the way, is that he was the one with the quote.
He was, he absolutely was the one. And that was always how he talked. So that, but the vibe around it was, this is a really, really good basketball team, and we will fight you to the death. We will fight tooth and nail. And that's what made the San Antonio games were knockdown dragouts. The Clipper games were knockdown dragouts. Oklahoma City, you had Kendrick Perkins and Zach Randolph threatening to square off. Teams didn't want to play those guys. Teams didn't want to come to Memphis and have to deal with them because they were going to get beat up physically.
The 2015 Warriors, the championship Warriors, I thought the toughest matchup for them were the Grizzlies, to be quite honest with you.
No, you're right, and I think the Grizzlies to this day and their fans think, well, what if Mike had not had the broken face? What if Tony Allen's hamstring had held up? Maybe the Warriors didn't get rings that year. You don't know. It was an opportunity, I think, for the Grizzlies, but the injuries were just a little too much. As amazing as Game 2 was with Mike Conley and that broken face coming back and playing as well as he did.
And the Grizzlies were up 2-1 in that series, I think, right?
Right.
And just the contrast in styles was a lot of fun for that series too. I mean, you had the Warriors who loved shooting it from the outside, and then you also had the other side who loved just kind of banging down low. That was a really fun series. And like you said, the grit and grind era, no one wanted to play them. Just for a little bit of like fast history here, in 2011, they go out to the Thunder, but it took 7 games. 2012 to the Clippers, it took 7 games. 2014 to the Thunder, 7 games. The Warriors, 6 games. So every single time you ran into this grit and grind team, you knew you were going to get a long series.
Yeah, it was a really good run for that group, and hopefully the guys that we got now with John and Jaren are going to be able to get to a point where they can be very, very problematic for teams to play against. And I know a lot of coaches right now are losing a lot of sleep about how to deal with John Morant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Pete, 2020. I want to talk 2020. One of the craziest years I think we've ever experienced. And the world paused. And the NBA season was paused in March and then restarted months later. I know in Orlando, Florida, in the bubble. What was that like? What was that experience like? I don't believe there was only a select few of members that were allowed there. So you were probably calling games remotely for the Grizzlies, the 9 games. Can you kind of talk us through that experience and what that was like, challenges or things that were interesting to you?
It was very, very difficult. I think national telecasters were allowed, but even they were off the floor in the plexiglass booths. No locals were allowed at all, and so it was really crazy. What they did is because everything was shut down, we went to FedEx Forum. They had the court down, they had the baskets up, and they built a platform for us, probably about 3-4 feet off the ground, with these giant, probably 85-inch monitors. One was the program monitor with what was going out over the air, and then the other one was an all 10 view of the entire court, so that if a player went down with injury and the play went back to the other end, we could still see what was going on with that player. I had done a lot of stuff remotely. I had done 2 Olympics, calling events remotely. It's really hard. The one thing that we were able to do, we're very lucky in Memphis that we have an excellent relationship with our coaching staff, that we could text them and say, hey, can you give us a little insight about John Morant? Can you give us some insight on, this guy or whatever? But it is very hard because you're limited to whatever the camera, whatever shot the director punches up. You're really limited. And obviously, if something happens with an injury, you don't have a sideline report. You don't have anybody that you can go to. When we are in our regular mode, our sideline reporter Rob Fisher will talk to one of our assistant coaches coming out of halftime. Well, clearly we couldn't do that, but he would get them on the phone, and they would be willing to talk to him for a minute or two and just kind of give them the take of what had happened in the locker room. So it was difficult. It was odd walking into an empty arena during the bubble, and it was odd walking into an empty arena last year when we were doing road games, and we do it from FedEx Forum. So here we are in suits in an 18,000 seat building, and there's nobody there, and you're doing a West Coast game, and here you are, you're walking out of the building at midnight after a West Coast game, and the streets are empty. It was just a very, very, very odd feeling. And I talked to a lot of my colleagues, and none of us were happy with having to do the games remotely, because it's not really the way the games should be done.
Right.
I talked with Mike Breen of ESPN. He said, I never realized how much I looked off the ball when I'm calling the games live. You really had tunnel vision to, again, whatever shot was on the screen, and you couldn't bring as many as much detail to the games as you could if you were actually there, which we are now. Thankfully, the Grizzlies are one of the teams that is traveling everybody, so we're grateful for that.
So I wanted to ask you about another unique experience, which was the play-in last year. And I was really happy that Ja and the Grizzlies were now in the national spotlight. Can you give like your insight and like your thoughts about the play-in? Did you like it? How did you feel about it? And Ja's, go ahead.
I mean, Ja was fantastic. I like the play-in from the league's perspective, because now you are involving more teams that have a chance to make the playoffs. You're dealing with more teams that have the opportunity to get into the play-in. So you're having a race. So you're having multiple races. You have a race for the 6th seed. You have a race for the 7th or 8th as opposed to the 9th or the 10th. And then you have the race for the 10th seed as opposed to the 11th, who doesn't even get in at all.
Yeah.
So it generates a whole lot more interest, and you have teams that are playing meaningful basketball longer. And so you don't have these games at the end of the season where a team is locked into a seed and we're just going to sit everybody. And it's bad basketball. So I think from the league standpoint, I think it's a huge boost. Frankly, when the Grizzlies lost the regular season game at Golden State, you're thinking like, well, okay, now you're 9. You got to win 2 play-in games. One of them is going to have to be on the road. You just didn't think that was going to be a good outcome. Knew we could beat San Antonio. That I felt very, very comfortable with. And the other piece of this is local telecasters could not do the play-in games. They were national exclusives. So, the biggest games of the year, and you're sitting on your hands, and you can't do anything about it. Yeah. So, the first game was in Memphis, and so sat in my regular seat. No cheering in the press box, but very excited when the Grizzlies played well. And then you think like, okay, we got to go to Golden State and play Steph Curry in an elimination game. We were just there, and Curry went for like 47 or some crazy number. Like, okay, this is probably the end of the line. And our sideline reporter Rob Fisher and I watched it in our producer's office at FedEx Forum, and I mean, we were jumping around, and I mean, it was amazing because I don't think anybody realistically expected the Grizzlies to win that game. But the fact that Ja came up big, Xavier Tillman hits a big 3, Desmond Bane with the big end 1 to seal it, to play that well on the road in a winner-take-all situation, that was very, very impressive on the part of John Morant and really this entire team, which is very, very young, playing a team that has a championship pedigree in Golden State.
Yeah, so me and JJ are actually we're fans of Golden State, and we did not feel comfortable at all going into that play-in game after facing the LA Lakers in just a dead heat, and then having to play someone physical like the Grizzlies, because we knew that someone like Dylan Brooks was gonna do his best to just sort of lock up Steph Curry, and you know what? He didn't do a bad job. He actually did pretty well. Did you think the same thing, JJ?
Oh yeah, he was just a pest on Curry, and not a pest in a bad way, like the way you're supposed to play defense.
Not like Patrick Beverly.
Yeah, not like Patrick Beverly. Not like
Had to go there, huh?
So Pete, we actually want to dive a little bit into you. We want to know what your journey was like in becoming the play-by-play broadcaster for the Memphis Grizzlies.
Where do I start?
Man, I mean, I guess with the Portland Trailblazers, you were a sideline reporter, correct? During the lockout year.
Well, it goes even further back than that. I'll try to give you the quickest possible version of this, so we don't put all your listeners to sleep.
Please.
Well, I think everybody here knows Kevin Harlan, right? From TNT. Yeah. Kevin grew up in Green Bay. I grew up just north of Green Bay. We went to the same high school, and we're 5 years apart. Kevin's 5 years older than I am. We went to the same high school, and that high school had a 10-watt radio station. So I was doing play-by-play on radio of basketball and football about the same time I learned to drive. And Kevin went on to Kansas. I went to Notre Dame. I did student radio there. And then after a brief stint working at a radio station in Wisconsin, I sent the tape to George Blaha, who is a Notre Dame grad and has been for 40 some years the voice of the Detroit Pistons. And he said, hey, this tape's really good. He gave it to his boss, a fellow by the name of Harry Hutt, with the Detroit Pistons. Well, in those days, and still to this day, George Blaha does Michigan State football on radio. Mark Champion was doing Detroit Lions football on radio, and Mark was George's backup. So they needed a third string guy on fall Saturdays. And so here I am, like 25, 26 years old, and I'm doing radio play-by-play for the Detroit Pistons the year after their second championship at the Palace of Auburn Hills. And did that for about 6 years, but it was only like 3 or 4 games a year. Really wanted to get into it full time, obviously. Did a lot of stuff around the edges, did some stuff. I was living and working in Chicago, in South Bend, Indiana, just doing some stuff regionally. And then this fellow, Harry Hutt, goes to Portland. And he calls me up one night and he says, I'm going to get you to Portland. One way or the other, you're coming to Portland because I think you're going to have a hell of a career in the NBA as a broadcaster. And I said, yeah, okay, sure. Whatever. And wouldn't you know, it worked out. And I was hired originally Harry wanted to get me into the organization. And, that was about the time they were making the change with Bill Shonley, and they were thinking about making a change on TV as well. And so Harry said, I need to get you out here, get you in the organization. So the first year, which was a lockout year, 98, 99, I wrote the game notes for the media relations staff, did some sideline reporting, and the Blazers were one of the first teams to have a radio host do the pre, half, and post-game shows. And I would monitor the game, and I would cut highlights, and then at halftime I'd play the highlights back, and post game I'd do more highlights or whatever. So, and then did a little TV sideline reporting. So I was there for that 50-game lockout season, and then Eddie Doucette's contract came up, and they decided not to renew it, and that's when I got the TV job working with Snapper Jones. So I was there. Then I think all of the Blazer fans will remember that, in July of 2003, the Blazers organization cut 88 people loose, myself included. And I was out of the league for a year. And then the following year, there were 3 opportunities. There was television in New Orleans, television in Denver, and the radio job in Memphis. And Memphis showed some interest. And I had gotten a job. I was going to do the Olympics in Athens for NBC. I was going to do team handball and judo. And my agent said, you've told Memphis that you're interested, but I really think you need to go there and you need to visit. Even though they've not invited you, I'm going to tell their VP of broadcasting that you're coming down to have lunch with them. And that's exactly what I did. I cashed in some frequent flyer miles, and I flew from Chicago to Memphis and visited with Randy Stevens, who was the VP of broadcasting at the time. We had a nice conversation, and one morning I woke up in Athens, Greece, to a phone call that I was being offered the radio job for the Memphis Grizzlies. And in those days, people forget that, teams didn't always televise all 82. The Grizzlies were only televising 50. So I would do radio for the 50 games that were on TV, the 32 that were not on TV. Don Poyer, who had been with the team since they were in Vancouver, he would do the radio. As it turned out, in January of 2005, we were on a road trip in Denver. Don passed away of a heart attack, and I finished out the year doing both radio and TV, and then the following year I just went exclusively to TV and have been there ever since.
So in that time and in all of your experience, what's been your favorite moment calling a game?
Oh, you got to think back.
Well, I mean, there are so many that leap to mind. I remember from Portland days, I remember the Miracle Minute.
Yeah.
Okay, obviously against Dallas. The Game 2 beatdown of the Western Conference Finals against the Lakers. That was, that doesn't happen anymore because local telecasters are limited to only doing the first round of the playoffs. Back in those days, we could actually go as far as Game 2 of the conference finals if it wasn't on NBC. And we actually got to do Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals at Staples Center, and Portland just absolutely beat the stuffings out of the Lakers, which is always a lot of fun. Regardless, it doesn't matter what franchise you're with. Doesn't matter which franchise you're with. You always love beating the Lakers. As far as Grizzlies,
John,
I think. Did I touch a nerve?
No. Absolutely not.
He can take it. He can take it. He takes it
That's
every
okay,
single
Pete.
pod.
Keep going.
Now, okay, John, I got to tell you this. When you go to Portland and you're flying on the charter out of flight craft, and they got the air stairs that they roll up to the side of the plane. The bottom step of the air stairs, there are 2 words stenciled on the bottom step of the air stairs. Beat LA.
So I like that.
That's awesome.
So every time we would get on the charter flight with the Trailblazers, your first step was beat LA. As far as the Grizzlies, I think the Game 1 win, Shane Battier hits the big 3 to beat San Antonio,
right.
and ultimately, the Grizzlies would win in 6 games. I remember a triple overtime game where Tim Duncan and Marc Gasol exchanged improbable shots. I remember a Rudy Gay buzzer beater over LeBron James when he was with Miami. That was incredible. A lob that Vince Carter threw to Courtney Lee right at the very end of the game against Sacramento after the Grizzlies came back from something crazy like a 22-point deficit. So, I mean, there are a lot of great memories on and off the court, frankly. Being around people like Vince Carter and Marc Gasol and Mike Conley and the people that we've had a chance to be around. There are a lot of memories. It's hard to pick really, really one. I hope someday we can talk about a championship memory for the Grizzlies, but that might be a way off yet.
So, Pete, is there an underrated player that, when we watch on TV, it doesn't do them justice? You need to see this player live in person since you've seen many players live?
Yeah, it's a real good question. I think one of the guys that we just saw this past weekend, Nickeil Alexander-Walker from New Orleans, I think is a very, very good player that nobody really knows about. Played his college basketball at Virginia Tech, Canadian. I think he's very, very talented. Chris Middleton is a guy that, now he's getting a lot of shine, obviously, because the Bucks have been very successful. But for years, nobody really knew who Chris Middleton was. Mm-hmm. In Philadelphia, Matisse Thybulle, as a really good defensive player, is somebody that I think bears watching. He's not going to score a lot of points, but I think he's a real fun player to watch. So those are 3 just right off the top of my head. But there are a lot of guys that are just kind of undersung players, but once you watch them, they're total pros and that they always produce night in and night out.
And Pete, I think we're coming to the end of the pod here. I'm actually going to have you predict the future here. You're gonna look into your crystal ball, and it's 2022. The playoffs are about to start. What seed are the Memphis Grizzlies?
I think they're going to be 8th.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they're going to have to go through the play-in. That's the way that I see it. I think that they're probably going to be 8th, maybe higher. If they're healthy and things come together, they could go higher. 6 to me just seems to be a pretty heavy lift, unless there's another team ahead of them that sustains a significant injury. What happens if Luka Doncic has some catastrophic injury or something like that? But New Orleans isn't going to compete, I don't think, for the playoffs. Although when Zion comes back, how much are they so far behind now that is his presence going to get them into those top 10 seeds?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
San Antonio is going to be a struggle. Houston is not going to compete for it. Oklahoma City's not going to compete for it. So, the Grizzlies are definitely going to be in the play-in mix in some form or fashion. But obviously, you want to get the highest seed possible.
Yeah, I think we're sort of in agreement there. Hopefully they'll have more dominating wins like they just had with the Rockets. But Pete, I actually want to give you the floor here to just kind of plug whatever you're up to, what you're doing, maybe your podcast, maybe your cameo.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I am. I am doing cameo. So anybody wants a customized a video, a greeting, I have done everything from good luck in your cancer battle to, today's your wedding day. I've done weddings. I've done birthdays. I've done get well wishes. I've done graduations.
That's awesome.
It's a lot of fun. And yes, I do have a podcast. It's called the Grizz Weekly Grind on the Hoops Pod, the basketball podcast network, Hoops Pod Net, and comes out every Monday and Thursday. And you can get it wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Stitcher. Go ahead and look for it. And I've been really lucky getting a lot of really good guests. I try to talk to a lot of my broadcast colleagues. We've got an episode dropping on Thursday. Brian Seaman of the Clippers is going to come by. We've had Mark J. Spears. We've had Mike Breen. I've had Monty McCutcheon from the NBA referee office. So we've had some really, really good conversations, and hopefully people will check that out and subscribe.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, here at the clinic, we have the Memphis Grizzlies are actually in our top 4 teams that we watch on League Pass. So Pete, PRANICA will be listening to you the next coming games here, and we'd like to thank you for being on. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Pete.
My pleasure, Ro. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Pete, that's all we have for a pod. Thank you for being on, man. Seriously, this was a great opportunity for us, and you're a great interview, obviously.
Thanks for having me. And if you ever want to have me back, and if you ever want to talk about that experience about going to Tokyo with Japanese broadcasters, that was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, that was actually on our list too to talk about that. So I'm kind of. We would love to have you back.
Yeah, we'd love
we
to
can say that for next time.
Sure.
We also have that Allen Iverson story.
The AI story.
Yeah, we can get that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. There's plenty more. So yeah, we'll do part 2 sometime.
All right,
Sounds
that
great.
sounds great.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Pete,
you.
have a great
Thanks,
night.
guys.
Have a good night.
Take care.
Have a good evening.